What is up, YouTube? MK40 here. We are here with
Ruler School TCG.
All right, now for those of you that don't know who this is the man, the myth, the legend behind Force of Will, and pretty much the community holding it together, right?
I've been here for a bit, yeah.
Okay, so what is Force of Will, and why should people look at it?
Yeah, so Force of Will is a game that we like to say is fixed everything that people have problems with Magic and a much better game, but has the anime art style of players who love Yu-Gi-Oh! So it's like this perfect blending of like the art styles and themes and kind of play lines of Yu-Gi-Oh! But with a resource system like Magic, but it's not busted like Magic's is. It's like this perfect hybrid right in the middle that is a game that has been going on for quite some time and is it's really enjoyable even as it's evolved over the course of its 8-year history here in the United States.
So this is a very important note for those of you watching this that are like, wait a minute, Force of Will still exists as a game? So many of you might have had, the Reflect Refrain scars, some of the other scars with the Bahamut, OTKs from back in the day. Yes, Force of Will is still alive, contrary to everybody's surprise, and that's one of the things I wanted to sit down here and talk with Ruler School about, was just to go, hey, Force of Will still exists, and the game has evolved on a scale that you might not actually believe. And this is actually pretty important because now they're on a 3-month ban list system, and I'll let him explain that here because that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that you mentioned even in your video before, first off, thanks for doing that, was Force of Will has got rid of rotation. We now play an eternal format called Wanderer, so every card is legal outside of our ban list, which is updated alongside every single set's release and includes a full ban list, so just you cannot use any of these cards at all, and a combination ban list, which is the idea that you can use these two cards separate from one another, but they can never be used in the exact same list, whether main or side or whatever. They just can't be on the same registered deck. And it's a way for the company to kind of, rather than just use a ban hammer, use a ban scalpel to be like, well, this card is really good, we like it, we want you to be able to use it. When you combine it with this card, it gets a little out of hand, so we'll just keep those two things separate. And so that's been in place for about 2 years now and has really shown a pretty drastic improvement on metagame diversity, metagame health, and speed of being able to improve metagame health.
Well, I mean, it's already crazy that Reflected Refrain is legal again, and it's not hardly doing anything at all.
Yeah.
But that's your natural power creep cycle for any TCG at its finest.
Yeah, a card that's 6 years old isn't necessarily going to have the same weight.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when the game has gotten maybe a little bit faster in terms of some of its new skills.
Yeah, what we usually like to say that Force of Will tempo-wise is slower than Yu-Gi-Oh! But faster than Magic. So you do have decks out there that can kind of do the pretty traditional first turn kill on a god hand and your opponent is asleep at the wheel, second turn kind of more consistent lethals, but you also have decks that take you to like turn 6 or turn 7, and the average kind of game length is like 4 to 5 to 6 turns is kind of like where the sweet spot is if you average all the different kind of decks together.
So now that we let's talk about the competitive scene a little bit here, since we're talking about the average turn span here being anywhere from something insanely crazy to that. So if I was wanting to build meta, so every 3 months the game changes typically, which means new things get added in, so you're going to have an evolving format constantly. If you were wanting to get into the game right now, what would you say to players to try, and what would you think a budget would be that you could hit some of the higher tier decks?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think anything from Hero Cluster, which is our current kind of themed sets, would be a really good place to start. There's some pretty good, pretty budget-friendly competitive decks that you could probably build the whole thing at base rarity for less than $100. I mean, even at our Force of Will festival, there was a deck that top-8'd that the gentleman didn't even have enough cards for the sideboard because he hadn't quite figured out the sideboard yet, but the deck itself top-8'd just because like it had good strength, it had good availability of cards, and I think that deck total would be like maybe $80 if you wanted, if you didn't care about shiny stuff at all. And Force of Will in general, your like average competitive deck probably sits somewhere between $150 to $250, like for the whole thing at base rarity, based on, you know, how many staples is it running versus is it trying to do more tech stuff or tech one-ofs or things like that.
That's not bad at all for the course of a meta, especially like if you're going to be good to go for probably a little while with just adding in a couple of little things here and there. Like,
yeah, that's the one thing about Force of Will is with the rulers. Rulers have quite a bit of longevity, so the variance between a tier 1 and a tier 1.5 isn't a ton when you have it in the hands of a skilled player or who understands. So you can make a ruler last for 2 or 3 formats and still be relatively competitively successful.
So you mentioned FowFest. Want to give a quick little recap on how your competitive event went?
Yeah, so Force of Will Festival is an event that I host every year. It was a dream of myself and a couple of friends to say, like, let's do something outside of the GP competitive circuit that is a more celebratory but still competitive of Force of Will event. We had 70 players this year. We already have the details lined up. Not ready to announce quite yet, but for our next FowFest, we're going to do that. It's going to be a lot of fun. And so it's meant to serve as like a supplemental competitive event for people to kind of practice maybe during the off season until we get our next GP season. And the GPs are when people are going to start competing for invites to Worlds, which is in Japan every year. So giving people another chance to kind of keep their competitive edge and practice while they wait to start competing for those invites.
Well, you also said it's a celebration of the game, too. Like, it's kind of fun to have something else on the side, too.
Yeah, so. For sure.
All right, so we've talked a little bit on the competitives for, like, Hero Cluster and Value. What are some things coming up here? I know, especially for the returning players, we've had the extension rules come out. Yeah. For those of you that don't know, extension rules are basically, you remember Grimm from the Grimm Cluster or Little Red Riding Hood and all of those. You get a nice little block card that gives you an entire new set of cool little things that you get to add to your ruler. So you want to explain what extensions are?
Yeah, so extension rules are these kind of additional cards that sit in your deck list but don't count towards your main deck or side deck or anything. And they serve to kind of modify deck building, essentially. So the first one that we got, Crimson Moon Battleground, allowed you to take any 2 of the rulers from the very first year of the game and use both of them at the same time as opposed to just using one. So then suddenly that opens up a whole bunch of creative space of like which of them interact with each other. Am I doing one to support the other? And it opens up a lot of creative space and also brings a lot of those older rulers to the forefront of the game's like competitive space because suddenly they're being brought forward to be mechanically on par with the rulers that we have today. So it's a really cool way for people with older collections or, you know, who have that heyday to say, oh, I really remember these cards, the nostalgia factor, I'm going to play them in current competitive and have a chance of making them truly viable. For instance, an extension rule that's coming out in the upcoming set is boosting a ruler that her main gimmick was generating a special type of counter, but at the time, her biggest problem was it was slow to make the counters, so you didn't want to spend them. But they're giving her an extension rule that literally says, no, we're just going to give you 3 counters every turn, and when you spend counters, you draw cards. So, like, the 2 biggest weaknesses of her back in the day, they just said, no, we fixed that, and we're just going to let her do something better nowadays. So suddenly a ruler from 4 years ago is competitively viable again because they've kind of tweaked her through this extension rule.
That's something else that I know we talked about, but we haven't here, was FOW does do erratas on cards.
That is true. They do it through a couple of different ways. We've seen official errata reprints where as box toppers or in promo packs that are included in boxes, they will do erratas to cards so that you have a way to get the new text. And they will also just post erratas as needed balance-wise on their main Force of Will YouTube page as well as their actual official website. So it's another way that the company is very clearly monitoring the metagame and acknowledging that as a smaller company, sometimes design space isn't quite as explored as some of the other bigger games, and they're willing to make the tweaks to improve overall game health, which I think is a really big credit to iSpy, the company behind Force of Will, of a willingness to say like, hey, we should tweak this, and you're going to appreciate that we're going to try to tweak this for you.
What are the big things coming out here to get people excited for Force of Will?
Yeah, so there's a new set coming out in January, end of January 2024. It's called Pilgrim Memories. It is what iSpy is calling the first Masterpiece Collection, where it is a 180 card set featuring this one is specifically focused on Grim Cluster, providing 3 dedicated new support cards to all 20 of the original Grim Cluster rulers, on top of alt art reprints of some of their best original support, on top of main deck current Wanderer staples that you will just be able to get into this box. For instance, Dark Alice Rabbit Princess is kind of like the one that everyone talks about as like a Wanderer staple that's insanely expensive. For a long time, it was $60 for the base rare version just because you couldn't find it anywhere. And it's just being reprinted in this set that you will just be able to get them alongside a bunch of other pretty standard play the game in current format Wanderer staples. So like it's a really... The press release for the box even said you will be able to just build your own deck using just this product. And it will be a really good like jumping back in point to kind of try either nostalgia-wise to try your old rulers but have them be supported, or just jump in and say, this is where I want to start playing Force of Will. It's going to be a really good way to get into the game.
Man, they really are pandering really hard for the Grim nostalgia block.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, they have mentioned that Masterpieces, the first one is Grim, and that's truly going to be the first Masterpiece collection, so we imagine there will be more later. But this is certainly something that is a great way to get that nostalgia factor to kind of get older players maybe looking at the game again, because the times that they enjoyed the most was Grim Cluster, so to start there makes a lot of sense.
One little side thing here, ABC format is something that me and you played at FowFest. Do you want to give a cool little rundown on that?
Yeah, ABC is also just a fantastic format for players who are returning to Force of Will, or who maybe are a little bit hesitant to jump into competitive deck construction right out the gate. It's a way for you to experience what new FOW card design is like what you can expect to see, the kinds of interactions, the way the system works, in a way that is a much more relaxed pace than just jumping straight into the competitive environment. And so I recommend it pretty significantly for anyone trying to get back into the game who maybe hasn't played in a few years, because you don't have to worry about, oh, I'm going to play against tier 1 decks, because everyone is playing these singleton decks, just trying to make the best cards possible work, but it's not going to be perfectly fluid or smooth. So you get to see what new cards kind of look like and get a feel for, oh, this is a pretty cool effect. Maybe I'd try to build a full deck around it or something like that. You actually get to like flush out a full gameplay experience and get to experience a lot of different ideas.
Well, the other important thing is it also has a lot of old cards in it,
yes.
too.
Yes, for sure.
So you know, if you got the chance to see the demo decks and the decks that for the events and stuff to play with, there is a mixture of old and new in there, which I think was very important to me, because I saw the cards I recognized. Like I got to play with Reflect and Refrain, and I was like, oh boy, like this is fine.
Every single time you searched for a ruler, I was like, I think Robbie's gonna search for Reflect and Refrain.
It doesn't matter if it's good. It was good back in the day. May as well, right?
Yeah.
So, any final comments here for people that wanna come back to FOW? Try the game.
I think the biggest thing that I would recommend is, we understand that Force of Will has had its ups and downs. We understand that the company has had its fair share of bad decisions and learning curves and trying to improve. The effort being shown by iSpy now is, I think, better than any card game company for any game that I've ever played. Like, it's a genuine effort to put consumers first and enjoyment of the game first. And I think that alone makes it worth at least giving it a shot. It's not the same company. It's not the same people that were in charge of the Millennia of Ages disaster or Reflect Refrain. It is a company that is listening, paying attention, makes mistakes because all companies make mistakes, but is genuinely trying to address them quickly, and more often than not doesn't make mistakes, but if they do, fixes it in a way that is incredibly positive and just really good for the game's health overall. So it's an enjoyable game. It's worth giving it a shot. If it doesn't end up being for you, that's fine, but don't let the FAO is dead crowd convince you that it's not a game that's at least going anywhere, because it's not, and it's definitely worth your time.
So, guys, please check out Roller School over here if you need any info on the meta. There's plenty of content for you to check out. And if not, you can always tap him on the Force Will. Oh, the Force Will Facebook group does still exist. That's very important. Yep. And there's an official Discord as well as a resource.
Yes.
So I will leave a link down below to both of those and a link to his channels. That way you guys can kind of have some resources. Because when I was looking at the game, I was like, competitive info, where is it? You know, like, even like if you're not going to play the game competitively, or like that, you do want to kind of look at the competitive scene just to kind of get a little bit of a taste as to what's going on with the meta and just be educated, you know, even if it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. I don't know what's going on there, but cool, you know?
Yeah, so it's worth taking a look at, because I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with what you'd find, especially looking at new age gameplay.
Oh, for sure, for sure. All right, guys, I'll leave a link down below to everything, and you guys have a good rest of your day, all right? Peace out.
Thank you very much.